happy month of Marheshvan to you. We are at the beginning of a new month in the Jewish calendar, the month of Marheshvan, most widely known in Jewish circles as the month without holidays, following the overload of holidays in the month of Tishrei. And the most significant aspect of the month of Marheshvan for me is understanding that this is the time in the lives of our ancient ancestors when they would plant their grain, not knowing if there would be enough rains, not knowing if the grain would come to full maturity in time for spring and early summer with the barley and the wheat harvests respectively. This particular year, 5782, being a Shemitah year, being a year of agricultural remission, reflecting on this idea of our ancestors planting grain, the staple of their diet. Knowing that when our ancestors observed Shemitah, there would be no planting of grain in the Shemitah year in the month of Cheshvan, that the primary farming practice is one of the forbidden activities of sowing and many other activities that go into preparing the soil to receive that seed. Thinking about the ways that the anxiety that our ancestors felt in Shemitah year, in every year, but especially in Shemitah year, as it related to questions of insecurity around food access and food storage and food distribution. Would there be enough to eat this year? I'm sure was a question most every year, and most especially in a Shemitah year. The Torah preempts this anxiety, it names this anxiety, and the Torah stipulates in the book of Leviticus, in the text on Shemitah, on agricultural remission, it says, when you say, what will we eat in the seventh year when we cannot sow and cannot harvest our produce? And it proceeds to use this language of God providing blessing to the people. My sense is that the Torah is not speaking about divine miracle and divine intervention, but rather is speaking about building systems of stability, that it is we who are responsible for providing the blessings in our lives and in our communities. It is through the ways in which we build resilience, both our own personal resilience, but most importantly, the ways in which we build resilient community. And so when the Torah goes on to say that God will provide blessing in the sixth year, that there will be enough food for 3 years, and that people will be able to sustain themselves until a full season of growing in the ninth year, being the second year after Shemitah, until those storehouses are refilled again. In the Shemitah year, the storehouses were opened, fences are taken down, private property is absolved, and people share in their abundance, people share in their resources. So when the Torah stipulates that in the sixth year it is necessary to have 3 years worth of food grown, rather than seeing this as divine intervention, as some type of miracle, perhaps what the Torah is telling us is to build systems of resilience so that we understand how to conserve our resources, so that in years of lack we are able to share in the abundance. Marheshvan, this month that is absent of holidays, that is absent of ritual obligation, that is absent of the structured community gathering that the holiday experiences provide for us, is a time in which we enrich our relationships, is a time in which we grow the relationships which we already have. Especially in the Shemitah year, it is very important for us to reflect on, both as personal individuals but also as communities, what are the relationships that we have upon which we can rely? What is the difference between the support of emotional gratification, meaning the support that we receive that might come in the form of a text message or a Facebook message that says, I'm thinking about you. This is valuable support. It is immeasurably valuable support for a human being to know that they are thought of and cared for. And there is a substantive support that is separate and different from emotional support, that we sometimes lose sight of just how important it is to build relationships around community, irrelevant of if we share similar perspectives, perhaps most especially when we don't. To be able to build resilient community that is able to support one another in practical ways, that is able to build systems integrated into how we share of ourselves and how we share of our resources, that distribute those resources equitably for those who are most in need. When we have time, when we have space for reflection and expansion, which this month of Marheshvan provides for us because of the absence of those ritual obligations, because of the absence of that structure community building, it gives us the opportunity to explore the ways that we as individuals are missing the needs that we have. What needs that we have are not being met? Who in our communities do we already have relationship with that we can capitalize upon, that we can receive from? Where are the relationships that we lack, that we need to build new? How is it that these moments of transition, of preparation for the uncertainty and instability of the rainy winter, of the wet winter, depending on which part of the northern hemisphere we live in, how is it that the systems that we have in place do and do not meet our needs? And what are the systems that we can build new? Or what are the ways that we can appropriately fix and support and add more strength to the systems that we do have? When we have the time, when we have the space to take that step back, it provides for us the opportunity to analyze. It allows for us the possibility to strategize. Like the old parable of the grasshopper and the squirrel, where one prepares for winter by storing food and one enjoys the day-to-day and says there's time later. We need to be able to prepare ourselves to build systems for the world that is coming, not for the world that was. When we look at the wisdom inherent in Torah, like Shemitah, as an example, as just one of many examples, when we look at that wisdom that we find within the creative expressions of our ancient ancestors, our job should not be to replicate them, but to adapt them so that the expression of those values today support us in the ever-changing world that we exist in now, so that we can have integrated systems of resilience built for the next generation. Our responsibility now is to preempt the anxieties of the future coming based on the wisdom that we have cultivated of the past experienced. The Jewish cultural worldview of our relationship to memory and our relationship to legacy, of our relationship to past, should not be an obsession with what was, but should be an opportunity to learn of what we know now could be. The month of Marheshvan, because it gives us that time, because it gives us that space, gives us the opportunity to tap into the hopefulness that our ancestors must have felt as they planted their barley and wheat seed, not knowing for months, not knowing for 6 or 7 months if it would come to fruition in time, if it would dry in time, if it would be resilient in itself against pests and molds. Would there be enough food in the coming year? The Torah gives us a recipe. The Torah gives us a pathway of how it is that we are able to support ourselves in those times of insecurity, of those times of instability. And that is to bond together in community, to build systems that allow for the equitable distribution of food resources, that allow to build systems that allow for access, to build systems that integrate our interdependence on one another as opposed to our codependence on markets and external structures. Our internal interdependence will help us in building resilient communities. It's not enough for us to just think about the ways that we can support others, but to shift our priorities, to understand that our obligations to community will ultimately support our needs as individuals, and our needs as individuals should never circumvent our ability to create resilient community. Our ability to produce community systems that work in supporting the needs of the most vulnerable. That our anxieties should never threaten the well-being of another individual. The month of Marheshvan gives us that time, gives us that space to check in on what has worked in the past and to see what has not. To understand how to adapt what has worked to future times unknown coming, and to reflect on the lessons learned from our past in order to rectify the wrongs and in order to create new creative systems. As we move through this month, deepening into our experience of autumn, as the anxieties of winter continue to creep in around us, as the days shorten and the nights lengthen, as the temperature decreases, as we experience that vulnerability, let us remember that wisdom from the Torah, that when confronted with the anxiety of uncertainty and instability of the unknown future, it is building systems of resilient community. It is building systems of equitable distribution and access. It is supporting our communities so that we ourselves can feel supported. This month of transition deeper into fall, this month of Marheshvan, should be a blessing for all of us to take a step back, slow down, and understand the ways that we have to contribute to that future resilient community that we so deeply need in this world.